Hi everybody, and welcome back to another video in the Empire at War modding tutorial series. Last time I had an individual ask me how to compile shaders so that if you have custom shaders in your mod, the Steam version of Empire at War will know how to read them. When Petroglyph released Empire at War on Steam and provided the most recent multiplayer patches and so forth, they changed something under the hood that made it so that the game would no longer recognize uncompiled shaders. Very problematic for those of us who have spent many hours writing our own shader code to suddenly have them not work in the game anymore. So I'll demonstrate how to compile your shaders so that you can get them working again. This tutorial is not going to go over how to write shaders. That skill is something that requires at least a foundational knowledge in computer programming, and could easily be several videos by itself. So maybe for a future subject I can do a mini series that goes over writing shaders. For now, we'll just discuss how to compile them. I'm also going to show you how to compile your mod into meg files. This is not required for the Steam version, but compiling your entire mod into meg files, it helps in some small ways to sort of increase performance. Files load quicker when they're loaded from meg files, and it just helps to keep your mod kind of organized and tidy. So let's start with shaders. The first thing that you will need is the shader compiler tool that is part of the DirectX SDK. You can download the entire SDK if you want. Just Google search for Windows SDK or DirectX SDK and download and install that. Or you can look in the description of this video. I'll provide a link there that is just for the shader compiler tool that I've uploaded to my ModDB page, and you can download that. The next thing you'll need is to download all of the uncompiled source shaders for Forces of Corruption. Petroglyph provided these for free, and they have a simple web page that has that and some other helpful modder resources. I'll provide a link to that page as well in the description so that you can have your source shaders and your shader compiler tool ready to go. And once you've downloaded both of those, go ahead and open the folder that contains your source shaders and open Command Prompt. We need to find our fxc.exe executable program, and we're just going to drop that into the root folder where our source shaders are located. The next thing we have to do is we have to point Command Prompt to this directory. So I'm going to click up here in my address bar and copy that directory and go into Command Prompt and type cd for change directory, space, right click, and paste, and then hit enter. Now we can see that our directory has changed to the location of our source shaders. Now let's just assume that I have made edits to mesh bump colorize, and that's the shader that I want to compile to work in the Steam version of my mod. If I open this up, we can see just here, a little ways down, include bumpcolorize.fxh. fxh, that H, means that bump colorize is a header file. In layman's terms, a header file is like a resource that contains functionality that is shared by multiple other shaders. So you have bump colorize that defines parameters and mechanics that are the core of several shaders that branch off of that. So the code that's here within mesh bump colorize is not all encompassing for how the mesh bump colorize shader will work. It's pulling resources from bump colorize as well. So when we compile this shader, we have to make sure and tell the compiler to include the header file as well. Not every shader will have a header, so there are two versions of the command that I will paste into the description so that you can just copy and paste them and make the edits that you need to. One version is for compiling shaders that have a header. The other version is compiling shaders that do not have a header. So since Mesh Bump Colorize does have a header, we need to use this top command here. So fxc.exe, we're telling command prompt what executable to run. We're telling it that we want shader version 2.0. That is the version that Empire at War uses. And we're telling it that we want to create a file called, well, we want to name it whatever our compiled version will be called. So in this case, we'll just use the same name as our uncompiled version, meshbumpcolorize.fxo. And then we need to call out the name of the shader that we are compiling. So in this case, meshbumpcolorize.fx. Now this \i is include, and then we want our header file. So if we open this back up, it's bumpcolorize.fxh. So we'll copy that name and paste it here. Just to go over this one more time, we're telling command prompt to run the fxc executable and compile using shader version 2.0. We're going to create the file meshbumpcolorize.fxo, and we're going to create it using meshbumpcolorize.fx and including bumpcolorize.fxh. So I will copy this entire line, go back into command prompt, which has already been pointed at this directory, right-click, paste, and hit enter. If our code is sound and we don't have any errors, it will say compilation succeeded, and it will tell you the directory that the exported fxo file has been sent to. It will be the same directory that fxc.exe is located in, and we can see right here meshbumpcolorize.fxo. That file is the compiled shader and the one that we will need to place in our mod's shader folders to work with the Steam version of the game. The process for shaders that don't have a header is exactly the same. You're creating the name of the shader you want to make and the name of the shader that you're compiling, and then just omitting the header portion. But otherwise, pointing to the directory, fxc.exe, everything else is exactly the same. So don't be afraid of command prompt. I know a lot of people get scared of doing anything that requires it because it's kind of foreign to most people, but it's really very straightforward. And if you want to explore this further, there's a lot of documentation out there for the DirectX SDK. There's many functions that you can use this program for in terms of compiling and decompiling shaders and all kinds of stuff. In fact, there's a whole wiki page that explains the different functionality of the shader compiler. Most of it is not relevant to Empire at War, but if you're interested in game design and specifically interested in writing your own shaders, the fxc.exe compiler tool is used for all kinds of things. You can use it to make shaders for Unity, for Unreal, and Empire at War, obviously. Anything that uses a DirectX shader, really, as far as my understanding goes. So it's a great tool to familiarize yourself with if you plan on getting into game development and want to know how to make shaders for even, modern game engines. Empire at War is a decade old now, but this compiler is still used for shaders today. So check it out and become familiar with it if you want to. Otherwise, all you need to know for doing shaders for your Empire at War mods has already been explained. It's really straightforward and simple. Okay, now let's go over how to compile your overall mod into meg folders. Just to reiterate, this is not required to release your mod on Steam. If you don't compile into meg folders, your mod will still function properly. However, a couple important things to note. Meg files do increase loading times a little bit. It will help performance a little bit. But the really critical part is that there are certain scripts that the AI uses, particularly in Galactic Conquest, that will not function unless your scripts are compiled into a meg. Don't ask me why this is. I didn't design the base game, but I do know that this is the case. So if you have custom AI scripting, you have to follow this step, at least for the AI files, in order for them to work. So let's get started. The first thing that you need is the Meg Editor tool. There are a couple different versions of Meg editors out there. There's one that's just simply called the Meg Extractor. That tool allows you to extract files from these Meg folders, but it does not allow you to create Meg folders of your own. You need to make sure and have this Mega File Editor so that you can not only extract files from your Meg folders, but create Meg folders and edit Meg folders as well. So I'm just going to create a new Meg. Now, this top window here is an already compiled version of my mod, Rise of the Mandalorians. Down below here, I have source files that I want to compile. The above is to show how your mod should look when things are compiled, because it's not just as simple as, selecting all your files, dropping them into a Meg folder, and calling it a day. There are a couple of exceptions. First of all, your text files. That in a DAT file, DAT, that's already compiled, so this doesn't need to go into a Meg. This, you just need the DAT editor to edit text strings and so forth, but this gets left alone. Your resources as well, your GUI dialogs, if you've edited this file at all, likewise does not get compiled. This just remains free by itself. Your GUI dialogs XML file as well, if you're editing anything that has to do with the GUI dialogs, will also remain uncompiled. A weird little anomaly. I'm not sure why this one has to remain separate, but your GUI dialogs will break if you compile them. So leave the XML and the actual resources file uncompiled. Everything else from your audio to your XML and AI files, maps, models, music, shaders, textures can all get compiled into Meg folders. So to do this, we need to create a folder on your desktop, and it has to be on your desktop. Just a weird quirk of the Mega File Editor, that this data file folder has to be on your desktop. So create a folder on your desktop called data, and in it we're going to put only the things that will go into the Meg file that we want to create. So for this one, let's just assume that we're creating this config.meg. That would be all of our scripts and all of our XML files. So I'm actually going to remove these so that I just have my scripts, I just have my XML. Now, the scripts and the XML should include all of the files from the base game as well. So before you even get started, grab the config.meg from the base game and extract it all to this data file folder. I keep getting those mixed up. Extract it to the data folder on your desktop. Now, take all of the XML and script files from your mod that you want to compile and copy and paste them into these folders respectively. Obviously, when it asks you to overwrite, you want to go ahead and overwrite. So I'll do this with an uncompiled version of my mod. XML and scripts. Copy. Yes. And then I want to copy and replace. So now these two folders include everything from my mod as well as any files from the base game that I have not edited. It's a comprehensive collection of all of the config files that will go into this config.meg. Then in my mega file editor, I want to go to Edit, Insert Directory, select that data, hit OK. Adding files, continue, yes. We'll just wait for it to do its thing. It can take a couple of minutes, particularly if you are importing texture files, takes the longest. Now this is the important part. Once all of these are in here, we want to make sure that the very first folder that it's pointing to in its file path is the data folder. If you have your data folder anywhere but your desktop, it's going to start from your C drive. It'll say C, users, whatever your username is, blah, 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 the rest of the file location. It's not going to start with data. That's why it's imperative that the data folder has to be on your desktop. Otherwise, it won't work. But assuming you've done it right, it should be something along the lines of data scripts AI, data XML, and so forth. Once all of your files have imported and you've made sure that that file path starts with data, File, Save As, and then name it the same name that is used in the base game. So in this case, it's config.meg and save. Obviously, this prompt, we want to make sure that we're using Empire at War. So we'll choose Format 1 and click OK. Then we'll locate that file. I just saved mine to my desktop. We'll locate that file and we'll just put it in the data folder of our mod. And you'll repeat this process for your maps, your models, your music, your shaders, your textures, etc. Just follow whatever folder structure you currently have in your mod. Just follow that folder structure. But since we are including the insert, when we go to insert directory, since we're starting with the data folder, it's going to import everything that's in data. So you have to do these one at a time. So if I'm going to go and do my music, for example, I would have to delete these and then bring in my music, re-import, save as music.meg, and just repeat until you've got everything there. And that's it. Again, pretty simple. You just have to have the right tools and sometimes a little bit of patience. And for both of these, for shaders and for the Meg file editor, it's always good practice before you compile anything to make a backup of the source files. That way, if something goes wrong with the compiler, if something gets corrupted, you can start over without having lost any work. I've learned this the hard way many times. Save yourself the agony, make backups, do it right. Thank you for watching today's tutorial video. If you have questions about the video or suggestions for future topics, be sure to leave a comment down below. Also, if you'd like to support this channel and the work that I'm doing, feel free to donate to the PayPal link provided in the description below. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.